Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Takeout Effect, a new podcast brought to you by Business Takeout. The Takeout Effect is a podcast series that features in depth conversations with business professionals, influencers, and industry experts who share intimate details regarding their journey towards success. I'm your host. My name is Banki, and today's guest is Eunice Kays Yeboah from the Canadian Policy Network. Um, can you tell everyone about who you are, Eunice?
Sure, yeah. So as Banki said, thank you so much, firstly, Banki, and to the Business Takeout team for inviting me to speak on the first iteration of the Takeout Effect. So as Banki mentioned, my name is Eunice, and I am one of the co-founders and current board members of the Canadian Black Policy Network. And I completed a master's degree a couple years ago from the University of Toronto in public policy, and just really wanted to explore more about the Black community and what policy means and how Black communities can really get involved in the policy process. And so I currently work with the Ontario government, specifically on youth strategies, working on the Ontario Black Youth Action Plan, so delivering youth initiatives, across the province. And outside of my 9 to 5, I do other things that I'm really interested, such as fashion design. So I'm a self-taught seamstress and fashion designer, and do a whole host of other things, other speaking engagements, as well as mentoring youth. So those are some of my interests as well.
Nice, really nice. For those who are just coming into today's episode, please like and share and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So the Canadian Policy Network, you are one of the co-founders. What is it about?
Yeah, so the Canadian Black Policy Network really is a space that myself and the other co-founders, Anna K. Russell and Charnel Morgan, we really wanted to create a space for Black communities and allies to come together to collaborate, to discuss policy issues that are affecting not only Toronto's Black communities, but Black communities within Canada. We know that there's sort of shared experiences across Black communities in Canada and the United States, across the globe, across the African diaspora, but there are some very different niches and different experiences as well that Black communities face in Canada. And there has never been a Black policy network in the country. And so we thought it would be a great idea to create a safe space, a platform, and really a place where people can come together and discuss these issues. But beyond discussing the issues, also finding resolutions in a very collaborative way, and also creating a space where Black communities can be involved in the policy process, which isn't something that the Black community in Canada has really been used to or has had the chance to do. So that's what the intention of the network is.
Okay. Can you give an example of a policy that you'd be looking into that affects the Black community?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most obvious ones that has really brought policy back to the forefront of conversations, because I know when I was in school a couple of years ago, policy really wasn't that popular. People didn't really understand, like, what is policy? I mean, we have law. We don't understand where policy fits in. But for us, as we see right now in Canada, there's a lot of effects of COVID-19 on the Black community. And so just really understanding how systems, how institutions, where people live, where they're located geographically, how that actually affects them in terms of the current situation of the public health emergency. And so even looking at a public health policy that is related to COVID-19, you can really see that Black communities are left out of the conversation. There aren't really resources that are being brought into Black communities as much as other communities that may be better resourced. If you look at the education system, for example, I think that's one area where people may be a little bit more familiar with how policy works. But in terms of policy or education policy, a lot of Black students are being left behind. You can look at the Toronto District School Board and see that Black students are expelled at a much higher rate than their counterparts. And so those are the sort of policy areas that we want to look at, employment, and other areas too that Black people are underrepresented, or even the criminal justice system or economic development, for example, where Black communities are often under-resourced.
Okay. So they have issues with the policies, right? They come to you, or they come to the Canadian Black Policy Network. And my question is, how does it work in terms of finding solutions?
Right. So I think I'll just take it a few steps back and just go back to how we got to forming the network. So initially, myself, Anna Kay, and Sharnal, we all graduated from the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. And naturally, we didn't really see or feel like there was a space for students like ourselves, Black students, to really talk about these issues. We really didn't see the representation too much in terms of the different policy areas that were being spoken about or explored. And for example, if we were talking about economic policy, how does that affect Black communities? There was really not much conversation around that. And so we really wanted to be able to create a space, like I said, to be able to do that. And so we started off with the Toronto Black Policy Conference in November of 2019. And we got a lot of really great feedback. A lot of people from the Black community, a lot of allies came out. I think we had over 100 people in person, over 100 people on the waiting list, over 200 people tuning in live. And so we really recognized that the Black community really needed this type of space to engage in the policy process, or just broadly speaking in the decision-making process, because a lot of us are not always at these tables, whether that's in terms of government, the private sector, the non-profit profit sector. And so once we got that feedback, and a lot of people kept on saying, one reoccurring theme was that people wanted to have a network, something that was ongoing, something that was federal, not just focused on the city of Toronto, but something that was Canada-wide. And so that was sort of the impetus for us to create the network. And so as the network is expanding, we're hoping to do a host of things. And I think you may ask some more direct questions maybe later on. So I don't want to get into that portion in terms of what we plan to do. But essentially, we want to be able to create that space where Black communities can come together and can have direct influence on the policies or in the policy process directly with decision makers, whether that looks like councillors, city or town councillors, whether that looks like members of provincial parliament, members of parliament, whatever that looks like. We just want to be able to create a space where Black people can actually voice out their concerns, and we can work together towards solutions. Because one thing that I wanted to say additional to what I've been saying already is that a lot of the time decisions are being made and we're not at the table. And so the solutions that are being developed aren't working. They don't resonate within the community because the lived experience of those Black people who the decisions are being made for are excluded from the conversation. And so we really wanted to change that narrative and allow Black communities to come together and influence the policy cycle or decision making.
Yes, and you're right. A lot of the times we're not at the table, and it's 2021. We need to be at the table.
Yes, we do.
So recently, there was a report that was printed, and it's on your website, and it really goes into different aspects. Mental health. It goes into police brutality. Different areas where, we might need policies in place, political activism, the future of work for Black communities, it's enhancing the Black economy. There's different issues that was touched on. And my question really is, what are some of the challenges that you have faced?
Yeah, I think there's a myriad of challenges for sure. We try to find the light at the end of the tunnel, definitely, because it's difficult to get a network like this that really has never existed in the country off of the ground. But even what we realized through the Toronto Black Policy Conference, and I believe the report that you're referring to is the Looking Back and Moving Forward report, which is a collection of what we heard at the 2019 Toronto Black Policy Conference. And so for us, we have just faced some challenges in terms of wanting to scale up the network across the country, because I think a lot of the Black community population is really kind of found within the Toronto region, the GTA region, and just really being able to make those connections outside of the GTA and not be so focused on the Toronto Black community or population, but also ensure that the policy topics and the issues that we're speaking to are also relevant to those who may be, in the east or west side of Canada or the northern
Mm-hmm.
parts of Canada, so that we can really come together to tackle a lot of these issues. So I think that's one of the challenges that we've been facing. We just really want to be able to create those partnerships outside of Toronto, because we do have so far pretty good partnerships within the GTA region. But like I said, we want to be able to branch out, because the intention is to be a Canadian Black policy network, not only
Mm-hmm.
Toronto central. So I think that's one of the predominant challenges that we're facing.
Arlette says more diversity policy is required in all levels of government, since you could bracket federal and trickle down. Policy is one thing, but understanding why it's needed and compassionate implementation is required.
Absolutely. Yep, that's
So,
very true. And I just wanted to touch on that, because I think that's a very, very insightful point. I think a lot of the times policy decisions are made at the federal level, and then it
mm-hmm.
trickles down to the provinces and then the local governments. And the local government areas really where you see a lot of the implementation, and the policies really do get stuck there, because there's nobody at the front line, or there aren't really people with the lived experiences who are informing the policies at the federal level. And so as they trickle down, they don't roll out the way that I guess, some governments intend for them to. And there's a disconnect, right, at the local level. And so it's always important to have people who work at those front lines. So if it's childcare policy, for example, bring in the childcare workers who are working on the front line with these Black parents or these Black students, and let them feed into the policy discussions and the policy issues that are being discussed, because otherwise there's always going to be a disconnect and it's just not going to work. And that's why a lot of the issues that we're seeing even in our own communities are continuing to kind of happen, because there aren't those discussions being happened, or those discussions aren't happening rather, sorry, at the federal or provincial level either.
Jamie says there needs to be better policies regarding funding for Black businesses. She says the requirement for government funding is not transparent and is very challenging.
Yes, I agree 100%. And I don't think that the issues are entirely only about funding. And I definitely know that's not what Jamie is saying, but funding is definitely a big portion of it, because if Black communities or Black leaders or Black-led or Black-serving organizations want to tackle these issues and they don't have the funding to tackle them, then they can't tackle the issues, right? And I think a lot of the time, the expectations from governments or how the application processes work is they expect these Black-led institutions to just understand how to apply for this funding, but we don't. And I'm saying we as like a Black-led organization, we don't often have all of the human resources to be able to write all these grant letters, to be able to speak the language that government is expecting. And so then there are those barriers. So now when we don't get that funding, then we can't push the work forward. And sometimes when we do get the funding is contingent upon deliverables or things that have to be submitted. And then again, another layer is that funding isn't permanent, right? So there's always that level of uncertainty about, are we going to have enough money to deliver these services or these programs? And even if we do, it's not permanent, right? So those are definitely valid points.
Yes, and in talking about funding, because I also have a nonprofit, the Canadian Black Policy Network is a nonprofit as well. How do you raise funding for your business?
Yeah, so I would say when we started off with the Toronto Black Policy Conference in 2019, when we had pitched the idea to the city of Toronto, they were really excited about supporting the work. The U of T Monk School was very excited about supporting the work. The U of T Equity Department was really excited about supporting the work. So I would say our initial experience was quite easy to be able to gather or garner that support and that funding. I think now that as we have expanded to a more federal network, it gets a little bit more
Mhm.
difficult to get that funding. But we know that with a lot of the racial uprisings, a lot of organizations like banks and other levels of government are looking to provide funding of some sort. But it also goes back to the point that Jamie made, right? That the funding may be available, or the funding pool, whether or not it's sufficient is another discussion. But the
I was
funding
gonna
pool
get
can be there, but it could be difficult to access it even still, right? And so you asked the question about what are some of the challenges that we're facing. One of them would be we need to be able to raise the funds to be able to get this work off of the ground. But again, if we don't necessarily have all the human resources that we need, we don't have all the grant writers that we need, then how do we really jump over that barrier, right? So I think that's a very real thing that a lot of Black businesses are facing. Funding is there, but as we've seen on the news, for example, a lot of Black-led organizations were being rejected for the applications that they had been making to the federal government. So there are
Mhm.
issues there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely relate.
That's why we need to be, we need to, we need to build that generational wealth, and we need to create our own. And one panel that we had actually was talking about the Black economy. When we can build up that economy and we can
Mhm.
learn to also sort of share that wealth within the community as well. It's not to say we're being exclusive, but sometimes we have to be able to create our own wealth so that we can keep this work moving forward. So we don't have to rely on all of these systems that are causing these barriers for us to be able to move the work forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you stay on top of it all? The policies and just organizing your business and really trying to do as much as you can for the community. How do you stay on top of it all?
Yeah, it's not easy, if I'm being very transparent. It's not easy because we all have our regular 9 to 5 or 10 to 6 jobs that we work. And then we're also working on, the network after 5 o'clock until whatever time in the night. But we're always dedicated. And I think one thing that keeps us going is the fact that we know that this is something that the community needs. We actually need the opportunity to be able to engage in the policy process. And I know that's a very sort of theoretical phrase, because another question could be, what is the policy process? Black communities have been advocating for policy changes, or just changes broadly to the way decisions are being made, for
A
many
long
years.
time.
We have a history of Black people in Canada for over 400 years. But why isn't that activism being translated into decision making? Because we lack the leadership. And so even though it can be difficult sometimes, looking for funding or trying to garner that funding and that support, and the work can be quite heavy sometimes to push forward, we're motivated by the fact that we know that having a network such as this can really change things for our community and can create a space that didn't exist before. And so that's what keeps us going, and that's what keeps us motivated to just keep pushing through. Yeah. One day though, the what is the saying? The raindrops will eventually turn into a mighty ocean. So that's how we look at it, one step at a time, day by day.
Yes, and we have to keep striving and keep going and not give up, because the generations behind us, we're
Yeah.
opening the doors for them. That's pretty much what it
Yeah.
is.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Paving the way.
Exactly. Any tips or advice for our viewers, including any information and resources?
Yeah, I would say if you want to learn more about the Canadian Black Policy Network and the work that we are aiming to do, so we want to be able to bring out some policy briefs or newsletters that we can sort of, connect with the community through. Please visit our website at CBPN, Banki.ca. And we will be planning for another conference this year around the same time in November. So we will be definitely sharing more details on that. But one resources that one resource, sorry, that I would like to direct everyone to, which some of you may be aware of already, is the City of Toronto's Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit's website. So if you just type that in on Google, you'll get all of the resources. They have done much work in terms of anti-Black racism, how to develop an anti-Black racism lens, analysis tool in terms of policies, decision-making, how to apply an anti-Black racism lens to policies and decision-making. And so I think that's a really useful resource. And I think that even with the federal government's development of the funding pool to fund the knowledge hub for Black communities, as that is being built out, I think that'll be a really great place for us to be able to access information in one centralized place, because I think Black communities are doing a lot of great work, but to some extent, it's a little bit isolated. And so we kind of have to go to different places to find out what everybody is doing. But it'll be really great for us to have a central location where we can find lots of information, whether that's about finances, economic development, education, etc.
Okay. So what if someone has a policy that they want to really bring to the forefront and they come to you? How is that process?
Yeah, so we are in the works of developing a formal process of how we want to be able to move forward in terms of moving policy initiatives or recommendations ahead. But through the policy briefs that we will be bringing out, we will be talking about relevant issues that are either happening now or that have taken place not too long ago. And so as we touch on those topics, we will also have the opportunity for community leaders or members of the Black community to be able to share, a quote or a recommendation on how they think that the government or any decision makers can really tackle those issues. So please feel free to send us an email at info@cbpn.ca, and we'll be happy to speak with you and just discuss how you may want to move forward with that policy recommendation. But we definitely want to be there as a support and even as a second set of eyes to look at any recommendations that you might want to push forward and provide any support that we can to be able to get that moving for you as well.
Okay. And in terms of collaboration, if there's other nonprofits in the Black community that are looking to collaborate, what are the different ways they can collaborate and how can they do that with you?
Yeah, so I think one great way that we can collaborate together definitely will be through the Toronto Black Policy Conference. So even if you're an organization that isn't really based within Toronto, you can engage with us. You can send us an email. You can message us on our social media platforms, and we will be happy to connect. So if it doesn't even have to necessarily be funding per se, but if there's any way that you want to build a partnership, you want us to work on something collaboratively, or there's any questions that you might have, just feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to support the best way that we can. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. But please stay tuned for the Toronto Black Policy Conference and all the great details about that, as well as the policy briefs that will be coming out. And if there's anything that you would like to do to support our work, or anything that you would like us to do to support the work that you're doing, any of the partnerships that we have that we can help you through or with, we are more than happy to do that, because we are really here to just support each other. And so we don't want anybody left behind. We can't do everything. We don't know everything, but we can definitely learn from each other. So always happy to help. Yeah.
That's definitely true. So there was a comment actually, before we go to the last question, there was a comment that just want to know if the producer can bring it back. I'm not sure what it said. Oh, it says, great job, Eunice. How can the general public get involved to push the agenda?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think that's something that we definitely want to keep on thinking through. And I always, defer back to the conference, because it was a very powerful and effective way to get decision makers to hear what Black communities had to say. So when we were leading up to the conference date, we did some media appearances with CBC Metro Morning with Matt Galloway. We did CBC at 6, the news outlet as well. We did lots of media sort of engagement, and that really helped us to get the word out there. A lot of decision makers from the from the province of Ontario, as well as from the city of Toronto, were really interested to engage with us and do work with us because they saw that we, in a sense, didn't want to wait to be invited to a table. Like we would just create our own table and ask people to feel free, pull up your chair and join us. But just taking that proactive approach has really kind of gotten the attention of decision makers. And I think even through that avenue of the Toronto Black Policy Conference, if you do come, whether we have that virtually or in person, and you voice your concerns or you voice your ideas or your solutions, they'll be ready to hear, because we have created that platform that has definitely demonstrated that it's an effective tool to engage in decision making. So that's one way I would say for now. And as we continue to build out the network, we will definitely share more ways that we can all get involved and get decision makers to, take in our recommendations. But that is definitely something that we're working on building out as well.
Okay. Sandra says, I am an entrepreneur and I'm planning to open my business. How can I get funding to buy a home? Where can I open my business?
Yeah, so that's a question. I think, I don't really work in that policy space per se, but I definitely know that when it comes to purchasing a home, the reality is that there is discrimination when it comes to Black communities in terms of getting a mortgage. So one thing I would say is maybe look into some mortgage agents or real estate agents that are within the community that can help you navigate that terrain, or help you to navigate some of those barriers that you may face if you try to do these things on your own. And there's a lot of real estate agents and mortgage agents that I know that are within the community that can help with that. But yeah, that's what I would say for now, because I don't want to speak to something that I don't have the full knowledge about. But that's one way I would say, because you can get that professional advice directly in terms of your specific scenario and your circumstances, and they'll be able to provide you with the knowledge and the tools that you need.
It says, not a criticism, but should we start not referring to Black communities, but a united community, singular?
So Black communities versus Black community? Yeah, I think this is something that we have gone back and forth with. And when I say we, I mean the co-founders of the network. The reason why we pluralize it and we say communities is because the Black community isn't homogenous. There's this idea that, if you identify as Black, then you are confined to a certain image. But when we look within the Black community, similar to Indigenous communities, for example, there are so many different cultures, there are so many different countries, there are so many different languages, there are so many different ways of doing things. And so the use of the plural term for community is very deliberate to demonstrate that there is that plurality, that we are not homogenous, that we are different, but we are united in our identities in a certain way, but it's very deliberate. So when, I say Black communities, it's not to say that we aren't united or we're fragmented, but it's really to just drive that point home that we aren't all the same. We all have differences. And so there's no one solution that is going to be a one size fits all. It needs to be a deliberative approach, because, for example, my background is I'm Ghanaian, right? And so not everything or not every decision that is created for the Black community is going to necessarily work for somebody who has my historical background, right? And so that's the reason why. But I definitely agree that we are united. And so the intention isn't to create this idea that we aren't. It's just to say that we aren't a homogenous people.
Okay. So going towards the ending of our show, what is the future goals of the Canadian Black Policy Network?
Yeah, so our number one goal for sure is to continue to just create a safe space where Black communities and allies. So the key is we don't want to make this an exclusive space. There is definitely benefits of having a space where only Black communities can gather together. But as we know, a lot of us are not really represented in the political sphere or in leadership positions. So we also want to ensure that allies are able to join the journey and learn what it means to apply an anti-Black racism lens to decision-making or policy decisions. And so we want to be able to continue to create that space for conversations, honest, open conversations, where we can also provide solutions. So not only stopping at what are all the issues that Black communities are facing, but how can we actually address a sustainable way. And so what we will be doing, as I said, is we'll be putting out policy briefs and engaging through the Toronto Black Policy Conference so we can continue to do that. And we just hope that we also are able to expand the understanding or knowledge around what policy is, because like I said, it could be a very theoretical statement, but we want there to be a very clear understanding of what is policy, what is a policy process, how do I get involved, how do I get involved in decision making, and how do I get into leadership roles where I can actually make a difference or actually influence decision making at a very real level. And so that's what we want to do in a nutshell.
Okay, I love it. I love all of it. I really love everything that you're doing. When I read upon it, I was like, wow, because I didn't know that you existed, right? So it was really great to see that you're making all the effort to really improve our community, and thank
Yes.
you for that.
Thank you too. We are very happy
Yeah.
to continue doing that.
Definitely. So this concludes the end of today's episode. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for this episode of the Takeout Effect. And feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and follow us on Business Takeout on all social media platforms. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.